Some people confuse luck with competence, and that confusion gets patients killed. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 47 minutes before the paralyzed veteran's heart stopped beating. St. Michael's Oncology Ward in Atlanta hums with fluorescent lights and antiseptic sharpness on a Tuesday morning that tastes like copper and coffee. Rachel Torres moves through the corridor with the efficient calm of someone who has triaged field casualties under mortar fire, though no one here knows that. Her scrubs are 2 sizes too big, hospital standard for a temp placement, and her shoes are regulation white, but her hands move with the terrifying fluid precision of a surgeon who has already saved 1,000 lives. A faint scar runs from her left wrist to her elbow, thin as a whisper, the kind of scar that only appears if you know where to look. On her scrub pocket, barely visible beneath a pen, sits a tarnished challenge coin no larger than a quarter. She touches it once before stepping into room 347. The monitors in the room hum their steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Oxygen saturation holding at 94%. Heart rate steady at 68. Blood pressure 122/78. Everything nominal. Everything within acceptable parameters. Everything wrong. Marcus Reeves lies in the hospital bed with the stillness of someone who has learned to carry pain like luggage, heavy and constant. The chart at the foot of his bed reads, paralyzed from the waist down, admitted 3 days ago for post-operative pain management following a spinal fusion revision. IED injury, Helmand Province, 2003. Age 42. Unmarried. No emergency contact on file. The medical record is sparse, clinical, a series of dates and procedures that reveal nothing about the man beneath the sheets. But Rachel sees him. She sees the tension in his jaw. That means the pain medication they're using isn't touching the real hurt, the kind that lives in phantom nerves and shattered spinal columns. She sees the way his fingers clench the bed rail when he thinks no one is watching, a gesture so small most people would miss it. She sees the recognition in his eyes when she steps through the door, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, time does something strange in the room. It bends backward. It remembers. Morning, Rachel says, her voice soft and measured, the voice of someone who has learned that whispers are sometimes louder than shouts. She checks the 4-line running into his left arm, her movements precise and deliberate. How's the pain? Marcus stares at her for 5 full seconds before he answers. Bad, he says. Worse than yesterday. Rachel nods once. She doesn't make excuses. She doesn't explain hospital policy or insurance restrictions or the chain of command that says pain management decisions belong to Dr. Caldwell, the chief of surgery, the man whose reputation precedes him through these hallways like a weather system. Instead, she pulls up his chart on the tablet at the bedside, scrolling through the orders, reading between the lines of what the previous nurses documented. For requests for increased analgesia in 28 hours. All denied. All waiting for Caldwell's explicit approval, a standing order he had issued in writing, printed and posted in the staff break room. All non-standard pain management protocols require my consultation before administration. No exceptions. Rachel has seen standing orders before. She has seen them in field hospitals in Sanjin Valley where a 3-hour helicopter ride meant the difference between saving a patient and writing a death certificate. She has seen them mean something real. This order, posted by a man who has never been shot at, who has never held a soldier's hand while his legs turned blue from gangrene, feels like something else entirely. She is quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving across the monitor data, the vital signs, the medication list. Then she touches the challenge coin in her pocket, barely perceptible, a gesture so small only her own muscle memory knows it happened, and she makes a decision. I'm going to talk to the pain management team, she says to Marcus. Her voice is deferential, the voice of a temp nurse speaking to a permanent patient. There are other protocols we can try. Things that don't require the standard escalation. Marcus's jaw tightens. Don't make waves, he says quietly. I've been in worse. I can manage. Rachel doesn't answer him. She knows what it means to manage. She knows what it looks like when good people convince themselves that suffering is just another form of discipline. She has seen that look before, on the faces of young Marines who were learning to carry things they were never meant to carry. In the hallway, the hospital breathes its fluorescent breath around her. Somewhere, a phone rings. Somewhere, a monitor alarms and stops. The smell of antiseptic hangs in the air like a chemical prayer. Rachel walks to the pain management office on the 3rd floor, her badge clipping softly against her sternum with each step. The attending physician there is a woman named Dr. Sarah Kemp, someone who actually cares about the gap between what modern medicine can do and what the people in power will allow it to do. Rachel knows this because Kemp approved Marcus's first 3 requests and only stopped because she was overridden by Caldwell himself, who called down personally and said, "We're not turning this ward into an addiction center." "Marcus Reeves," Rachel says, sliding the chart across Kemp's desk. "Room 347. Post-op pain management. Current protocol isn't covering his acute pain." Kemp glances at the chart, then at Rachel. "Caldwell's standing order," she says. "It isn't a question." "Yes. You know he won't approve an escalation." "I know," Rachel says, and there's something in the way she says it, a flatness, a certainty, that makes Kemp look at her more closely. "There's an alternative protocol. Multimodal approach. Lower opioid dependence, better outcomes for neuropathic pain. It's not non-standard. It's just not what Caldwell typically uses because it requires more monitoring." Kemp reads the protocol Rachel has pulled up on the tablet. It's solid work. Evidence-based. Exactly the kind of thing a pain management specialist would approve without hesitation if the conversation wasn't happening in the shadow of a chief of surgery's standing order. If Caldwell finds out, Kemp begins. "He will," Rachel says. "And I'll take responsibility for the recommendation." Kemp is quiet for a long moment. Then she signs off on the protocol. She should not sign off on it. By every measure of hospital politics and professional self-preservation, she should refuse. But something in Rachel's absolute calm, in the way she stands there with the casual confidence of someone who has already survived things that would destroy most people, persuades her. Kemp has only 10 years until retirement. She doesn't want to spend them wondering what would have happened if she had just said yes. By 10:38 a.m., Rachel is back in room 347, updating me for infusion with the new medication cocktail. The contrast between the fluorescent lights and the pale winter sun coming through the window creates sharp shadows across Marcus's face. She doesn't tell him about the standing order. She doesn't explain the breach of protocol or the calculated risk or the fact that she has just volunteered herself for whatever consequences come next. She simply says, "This should help. Give it about 20 minutes to get into your system." Marcus watches her hands as she works. The scar on her left arm, the steady grip on the medication cartridge, the way she doesn't waste a single movement. And then, so quietly Rachel almost misses it, he says, "I know you." Rachel goes still. Not frozen. Not trembling. Just perfectly, absolutely still. The way a predator goes still when it hears a sound that might mean danger. From before, Marcus continues, his voice barely above a whisper. "Helmand. I was just a kid. There was an explosion. You carried me 3 miles with your lung punctured. You had blood on your face and you were singing some song I'd never heard and you just kept moving. The room holds its breath. The monitors continue their steady rhythm. Beep. Beep. Beep." Rachel steps back from the bed and looks at him, really looks at him, and 20 years of muscle memory and buried recognition surfaces like something breaking through ice. The eyes are older now, marked by the particular exhaustion that comes from living without your legs, but they are the same eyes that looked up at her from a ditch in Helmand Province when she was still young enough to believe that saving one person's life might balance some cosmic equation. "You need to rest," she says, her voice level as a held breath. She touches the challenge coin one more time. "The medication will help." She leaves the room before Marcus can say anything else, before the moment can become something that cannot be taken back. She moves through the hallway with that same efficient calm, checks in with the other patients on her assignment, documents her actions in the electronic medical record with absolute precision. Everything above board. Everything deniable. Everything waiting for Dr. Caldwell to notice what she has done. And he will notice. Men like Caldwell notice everything that threatens the careful architecture of their authority. He is just one floor below this moment, in his office, reviewing charts for his Grand Rounds lecture, building the framework of a narrative that will destroy a woman he doesn't know and has no idea he has underestimated. The Grand Rounds conference room filled with the soft shuffle of 30 residents finding their seats, the smell of antiseptic and fresh coffee hanging in the recirculated air. Rachel Torres stood at the front of the room near the light box, her scrubs perfectly positioned, her badge clipped to the pocket with parade ground precision. She had faced worse than this. Mortars at dawn. Dust storms that turned day into twilight. The weight of a bleeding soldier across her shoulders for 3 kilometers. This was a hospital conference room in Atlanta. Her jaw was set. Her breathing steady. She waited. Dr. Caldwell entered like a man who owned the floor he walked on. His white coat bore the weight of his title the way other men wore crowns. He moved through the residence with the casual command of someone who had never been questioned, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being right so often that he no longer considered the possibility of being wrong. He smiled at the assembled doctors and nurses, a smile that never reached his eyes, and pulled up the first case file on the overhead screen. "Let's discuss dangerous improvisation," he said, circling Rachel's name in red marker on the chart. "Shall we?" The cursor landed on the pain management protocol she had ordered. Rachel watched it happen without flinching. The documentation of her choice. The timing of the medication adjustment. The alternative approach she had implemented outside his standing order. He enlarged the notes until her handwriting filled the screen, clinical and precise. "Nurse Torres here decided yesterday that my standing pain management protocol wasn't adequate for her patient," Caldwell continued, his voice dripping with theatrical concern. "Tell me, Nurse Torres, where did you complete your medical degree?" "Online?" The room rippled with laughter. Residents exchanged glances, the kind that said, "Watch this." He spent the next 12 minutes methodically dissecting each element of her decision. Not with anger, that would have been less effective. With the precision of a surgeon debriefing a complication. He called her our temp hero each time he referenced her notes, the words arriving with acid attached. He questioned her assessment of the patient's pain levels. He challenged her understanding of drug interactions. He suggested that her improvisation could have resulted in catastrophic outcome, that she had been fortunate rather than competent, that the only thing separating her from a serious protocol violation was luck. "We have standing orders for a reason," he concluded, turning to face her directly. "They exist to protect patients from well-intentioned mistakes. Nurse Torres, do you understand the difference between innovation and insubordination?" Rachel stood motionless in the posture she had held for the entire 12 minutes. Her feet were positioned shoulder-width apart. Her jaw was clenched but not trembling. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the wall above everyone's head. Her hands were clasped behind her back in the position she had learned 20 years ago, when she was something other than a temp nurse in a hospital oncology ward. She did not blink. She did not flush. She did not speak. The silence stretched across the room like a physical thing. Caldwell waited for a response that never came, then turned back to his audience with the expression of a man who had just proven his point without needing an answer. The residents shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the quiet, unsure whether they had witnessed a correction or a crucifixion. Grand Rounds ended 40 minutes later. Rachel left the conference room before the residents, moving with controlled efficiency through the hallway, her breathing exactly where it should be. No tremor. No anger on her face. Just the flat composure of someone who had learned a long time ago that showing pain only gave people power over you. She made her way to the vending machines on the oncology floor. The afternoon light came through the windows at an angle that made the hallway seem endless. She was reaching for change when she heard the voices behind her, already laughing before the words came. "Did you see Caldwell roast the temp?" one nurse said, loud enough that Rachel could hear every syllable. Her name was Jenkins. She worked the evening shift and had been kind enough during the morning briefing. Kind was context-dependent, apparently. Girl thinks she's smarter than the chief of surgery, the other nurse added. That was Martinez, who had made eye contact during the humiliation and then looked away. I give her until Friday before security escorts her out. You can't come at Caldwell like that and keep your job. Rachel slid a dollar bill into the machine. The mechanism whirred. The coil turned with mechanical precision. A can of black coffee dropped into the receptacle with a solid thunk. She retrieved it without turning around. Her hands were perfectly steady. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for something, a flinch, a word, some indication that they had landed the blow. She opened the can. The hiss of carbonation. She took a single sip and continued past them toward the medication room, her expression absolutely neutral. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind of restraint that came from having learned, over 2 decades of different lives and different identities, that showing your wound was the fastest way to confirm you had won. At 4:08 p.m., after the shift had momentum and the hallways had filled with the noise of evening rounds, Rachel found herself in the supply closet. It was a narrow space, about 8 feet deep, lined with boxes of gauze pads and 4 bags and compression dressings. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead with the kind of sound that most people didn't consciously hear but which burrowed into your nervous system like a tiny mechanical insect. She sat down on a box of sterile 4x4s and pulled the tarnished challenge coin from her pocket. The coin was military issue, the metal worn smooth by hands that had held it during worse moments than this. During moments in Helmand province when the radio had gone dead and extraction was 3 hours away. During moments in a field hospital in Kandahar when a 19-year-old Marine had coded on her table and nothing she could do would bring him back. The coin had been given to her by the commanding officer of her first deployment. It was the only physical reminder she carried from that life, hidden in a scrub pocket in a hospital in Atlanta, where no one knew what it meant. She closed her hand around it until her knuckles went white. The metal bit into her palm. Her breathing remained controlled, measured, exactly where it should be. She sat in the buzz of the fluorescent light with her eyes closed for 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Then she opened them, released the coin, and returned it to her pocket. When she stood and walked out of the supply closet, her face showed absolutely nothing. The medication room received her attention next. Rachel reviewed the supply inventory logs with the kind of focus that most people reserve for things that matter. The high-grade pain medications were disappearing in patterns too consistent to be random. The quantities too precise. The timing matched Dr. Caldwell's service days in a way that would have been obvious to anyone actually looking. She had been looking. That was the entire reason she was here, the actual reason the Navy had placed her in this hospital as a temp nurse on a contract that paid her roughly 1/10 of what a communications analyst earned at Naval Intelligence. She was photographing the 3rd page of the log with the pen camera she wore as though it were ordinary office equipment when the sound came through the wall. Not a page turning. Not the soft sounds of a hospital running normally. The alarm of a monitor escalating from steady beep to rapid-fire shriek. Room 347. Marcus Reeves. Rachel was moving before her brain had finished processing the signal. The log scattered across the counter. The pen camera returned to her breast pocket without conscious thought. Her body was already moving on the muscle memory of 1,000 other crises, the knowledge that every second counted in a way that most civilian healthcare workers never fully understood. She burst through the door of room 347 at a full sprint. Marcus was seized. His paralyzed body was convulsing against the mattress in the way that paralyzed bodies do when the nervous system decides to betray them. His pupils were blown wide, his pupils responding to nothing. The heart monitor was showing an irregular rhythm that looked like electrical chaos searching for pattern. Code Blue, Oncology 347, Rachel called out, hitting the alarm as her hands moved toward the crash cart. Get respiratory. Get cardiology. Now. The nurses on the floor responded with the trained efficiency of people who had done this 100 times. The crash cart was rolling within seconds. But Dr. Caldwell was already moving through the doorway, his face tight, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man who owned this moment the way he owned everything else. Step back, Nurse Torres. I'll handle my patient. But Marcus's heart monitor flatlined. The electrical activity simply ceased, as though his heart had decided the effort was no longer worth it. Rachel's hands were already on his chest, already beginning compressions with the rhythm and force of someone who understood that the human heart was a muscle and muscles required rhythm. 100 compressions per minute. Depth at least 2 inches into the sternum. The room had filled with people, but there was only one patient and only one thing that mattered. Caldwell tried to move her. I said step back. The defibrillator charged and delivered a shock that made Marcus's body arch off the mattress. No response. No sinus rhythm. Nothing but the flat line that meant death was introducing itself. Rachel reached for the surgical kit without asking permission. Her voice, when she spoke, carried something different. Something that made everyone in the room understand that the woman standing over Marcus Reeves was not the woman who had stood silently during grand rounds. The posture was the same, but the presence had changed the way the atmosphere changes before a storm. Get out of my way, she said. The words held the weight of command. At 1:51 p.m., Rachel stood in the medication room with inventory logs spread across the counter like evidence at a crime scene. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical drone above her head. She wasn't looking for expired medications or miscounts, that was the cover story. The Naval Intelligence Operation had placed her here 3 weeks ago to track a suspected medical supply theft ring, and what she'd found in the numbers was unmistakable. High-grade pain medications, fentanyl patches, morphine sulfate, hydromorphone, were bleeding out of St. Michael's Pharmacy on a precise schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday. Same quantities. Same items. Never enough to trigger automatic audits, but consistent enough that whoever was diverting them knew exactly what they were doing. Rachel's finger traced down the column. Missing, 240 fentanyl patches over 8 weeks. Street value approximately $48,000. Missing, 500 milliliters of concentrated morphine. Another $22,000. The pattern wasn't random. It was professional. Someone inside the hospital had access, authorization codes, and knowledge of the pharmacy's audit gaps. She photographed the logs with her phone, a burner encrypted with Pentagon-grade security, and was sliding the papers back into their folder when her radio crackled. Code blue. Room 347. Stat. The words hit her like a hammer strike. She moved without thinking. The medication room door slammed behind her. Her feet found the corridor and her pace accelerated from walk to controlled sprint, muscles remembering rhythms older than her nursing license. 12 years as a SEAL medic. 3 tours in Helmand Province. Hundreds of field surgeries performed under mortar fire with nothing but what she could carry in a pack. That muscle memory lived deeper than thought. It lived in her hands. She reached room 347 in 42 seconds. Marcus Reeves, the 8-year-old boy she'd carried 3 miles through desert crossfire 2 decades ago, now a paralyzed man in his late 20s, lay unresponsive in the bed. His monitor flat-lined. Not a single spike. Just the low monotone of catastrophic cardiac failure. The crash cart stood 3 feet away, untouched. The code team hadn't arrived. Nobody was moving. Nobody was doing anything. Rachel was first through the door. She was the only one doing anything. Move. Not a question. Not a request. The word carried command authority that made the junior resident and 2 nurses step back from instinct alone. She was already gloved, already positioning her hands on Marcus's sternum. Her fingers pressed down with controlled force, compressions 3 inches deep, 100 compressions per minute, the rhythm of it muscle memory singing through her shoulders. The cardiac monitor remained flat. Compressions alone weren't going to restart a heart this damaged. She looked at the crash cart. Defibrillator pads. 4 lines. Medication push. None of it was working. She'd seen this before. A heart that had stopped wasn't always a heart that could be restarted from the outside. Sometimes you had to go in. Get me a scalpel. Size 15 blade. Now. The intern reached for the emergency kit in the code cart. Rachel never broke her compressions. 30 compressions. 31. 32. The rhythm continued without hesitation. Her left hand remained on Marcus's chest, feeling the fragile geometry of his ribs beneath her palm, reading the body like a map she'd memorized in another life. The scalpel was in her right hand in seconds. She didn't look at who gave it to her. The blade caught light as she positioned it at the 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. This was direct cardiac massage. The technique from Helmand Province when a soldier's heart stopped in the back of a Humvee and you had no equipment and no time. You went in. You opened the chest cavity. You held the heart in your hands and made it beat. The scalpel moved in one smooth cut, precise as a surgeon's hand, because she was a surgeon's hand, and had been before she was a nurse. Before she was anyone in this hospital. The skin parted. Subcutaneous tissue. She didn't hesitate. The second cut found the musculature of the chest wall. Blood began to flow, dark and purposeful. Bovie. Cautery. The resident was already reaching. The electrocautery unit hissed as she sealed the bleeding vessels, the smell of burning tissue sharp and immediate, copper and carbon and the particular sulfur smoke that came from cauterized human tissue. 1 minute and 14 seconds since she'd entered the room. She found the sternum with the scalpel's tip and applied pressure. The bone was dense, resistant, and then it gave. The crack was audible, a sound like a green stick breaking, and suddenly the chest cavity was open, ribcage exposed, and there was Marcus's heart. A still organ the size of a closed fist, purple-gray and motionless in its pericardial sac. She opened the pericardium with 2 precise cuts and the heart fell into her palm. Her fingers found their rhythm immediately. Not compressions from outside the chest. Direct cardiac massage. Her hand closing around the organ, compressing it methodically, forcing blood through the ventricles, the chambers responding with their own reluctant contractions. Compress. Release. Compress. Release. The cardiac monitor showed nothing. Then a flicker. Then another. At 90 seconds, the monitor began to draw a line. A spike. Actual electrical activity. The heart stuttered. It gasped like a drowning thing finding air. It found its own rhythm. We have sinus. The resident's voice cracked with something between fear and awe. Rachel irrigated the chest cavity with saline, the hiss of liquid washing over exposed tissue, and assessed the damage. No visible tears. No major vessel rupture. The heart had simply stopped, and now it was beating. She began closing with rapid sutures, her movements economical and precise, each stitch placed with the efficiency of someone who'd sewn human beings together in combat zones where speed meant survival. Her hands worked in silence. Nobody spoke. The room held its breath. 2 minutes and 37 seconds from first incision to closure. Marcus's blood pressure was rising. Oxygen saturation climbing. 71, 78. 84, 91. Holding steady at 94. The monitor beeped its steady confirmation. Sinus rhythm. Regular. Strong. Rachel stripped off her gloves and began documenting on the chart. Clinical. Methodical. As if she'd just hung and fought and not performed open cardiac surgery in an oncology ward without authorization, without anesthesia, without anything except instinct and the muscle memory of 1,000 field traumas. She documented cardiac arrest at 1,400 hours. ACLS initiated. Defibrillation ineffective. Emergency thoracotomy performed with direct cardiac massage. ROSC achieved at 1402. Patient currently stable, monitoring continuous. Dr. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. His face had gone the color of old hospital walls. He watched her finish writing. He watched the monitor. He watched Marcus's chest rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm. And then his jaw tightened. His phone was already in his hand. He leaned close enough that only she could hear. You just ended your career. His voice carried the weight of someone absolutely certain. Someone who had power enough to make it true. He's alive. Rachel kept writing. Not looking at him. Just continuing the documentation. That's what matters. Caldwell left the room with his phone at his ear before she finished the sentence. She heard his voice in the corridor, tight and controlled. Yes. It's Caldwell. We have a situation. Pause. A nurse, a temporary, performed an authorized surgical intervention without my authorization. Open chest surgery. Yes, in the hospital. Unqualified personnel. Dangerous. Another pause. His voice dropped lower. I need this documented. Officially. Before she gets ahead of the narrative. Rachel continued documenting. Her hands were completely steady. 42 minutes would pass before the administrator summoned her. Within those 42 minutes, 3 board members would receive calls. The hospital's oversight committee chair, Caldwell's golf partner for 15 years, would visit HR personally with concerns about liability exposure and rogue employees. An outside investigator Caldwell had worked with on previous matters would already be reviewing her personnel file for irregularities. The wheels were in motion. The machinery of institutional power was grinding to life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Caldwell's calls were working exactly as intended. At 4:52 p.m., a hospital administrator named Foster sent a message to Rachel's unit, report to administration immediately. Foster was a good man, competent and fair, which made what was about to happen worse. He didn't know what he was about to do. Caldwell had been very careful about that. The narrative Caldwell had constructed was airtight, and an authorized surgical procedure performed by temporary staff outside her scope of practice. Dangerous. Reckless. Exactly the kind of liability nightmare that could shut down a hospital's accreditation. Rachel touched the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket, the one she'd been carrying for 20 years, the one stamped with a SEAL Team 6 insignia barely visible beneath the corrosion, and walked toward administration. The coin was cold against her palm. Cold and steady. A reminder of who she actually was, even as the hospital was preparing to erase her. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished doors like a mirror showing someone she'd learned to hide very well. A temp nurse. Nothing more. Nobody who'd ever saved lives. Nobody who mattered. That reflection was about to shatter. Within the hour, Dr. Caldwell's phone was moving like a weapon. 3 board members received calls. A dangerous rogue employee, he told each one, his voice steady and certain. Performed an authorized surgery. Ignored direct orders. Could have killed the patient. The words were precise. Lethal. None of them knew he was lying about the outcome, only about her obedience. His golf partner received a visit at 4:17 p.m. The man chaired the hospital's oversight committee and owed Caldwell favors stretching back 6 years. She's a liability, Caldwell explained over coffee that was already growing cold. Competent enough to be dangerous. The kind of person who thinks she knows better than protocol. The golf partner nodded. He made a call to HR before Caldwell's car had even left the parking lot. By 4:33 p.m., an outside investigator Caldwell had worked with before was already pulling Rachel's file. The investigator owed Caldwell a consultation fee paid in cash, no paperwork. Look for irregularities, Caldwell had said. Personnel issues. Anything that doesn't fit. The investigator was good at finding what people wanted him to find. He would find things. The machinery was moving now. 3 phone calls. 1 visit. 1 investigator. The network of privilege and obligation was tightening around Rachel Torres like a tourniquet. Caldwell sat in his office at 4:52 p.m. and smiled. He had learned long ago that institutional power moved faster than the truth. At 5:51 p.m. exactly, Rachel stood in the administrator's office on the 14th floor. 3 people waited for her like pallbearers. The administrator sat behind his desk, a thin man with reading glasses and prepared text. The HR director stood by the door, her face a study in administrative discomfort. Dr. Caldwell positioned himself by the window, the city of Atlanta spreading below him like something he owned. Nurse Torres, the administrator began, reading from a sheet as if the words might escape if he didn't anchor them to paper. You performed a surgical procedure without authorization. You violated protocols. You exceeded your scope of practice. You endangered a patient despite Dr. Caldwell's direct orders. Rachel stood at attention. Shoulders back. Eyes forward. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound like insects trapped in glass. She said nothing. You are terminated effective immediately, the administrator continued. Security will escort you from the premises. Your access badges are revoked. Final paycheck will be mailed. He paused, looking at her as if expecting collapse. Do you have any questions? Rachel nodded once. Understood. Dr. Caldwell's expression flickered, a microsecond of frustration that she had not bent, had not broken, had not given him the satisfaction of watching her crumble. He had orchestrated her execution and she had received it like a soldier receiving orders. That was not the response he had scripted. You'll need to turn in your credentials, the HR director said quietly, extending a folder. Rachel took it. Her hands were steady. No tremor. No hesitation. She had been fired before, though not in a way that mattered. She had lost covers before, though not in a way that meant mission failure. But standing in this office, watching Caldwell try to read her face for cracks he would never find, Rachel understood something with absolute clarity: she had succeeded at her real job. Marcus Reeves would live because of her. That was the mission that actually mattered. She turned and walked toward the door without looking at any of them. Outside in the hallway, the older security guard who had escorted her out of room 347 was waiting. He had an Army Ranger tab tattooed on his left forearm, faded green ink from decades ago. He studied her face as she walked toward him, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe. Or suspicion. Or something in between. You need to collect your locker, he said quietly. Rachel nodded. They walked together through the corridors, past nurses who didn't look up, past patients who didn't notice, past the entire machinery of St. Michael's that had no idea who was leaving. The guard moved like someone who had walked these hallways for 20 years and knew every corner, every rhythm, every secret. At her locker, Rachel removed her belongings. Stethoscope. Penlight. A half-empty bottle of ibuprofen. The challenge coin she kept in her right cargo pocket, tarnished silver with a Navy SEAL trident worn smooth by 2 decades of grip. She placed each item carefully in her bag. The guard watched. You military? He asked. Rachel didn't answer. Her phone buzzed. A text from her naval intelligence handler, cover blown. Extract immediately. Mission failure. She deleted it without responding. It's okay, the guard said softly. I won't tell. Rachel looked at him. Really looked at him. The Ranger tab. The way he stood. The careful neutrality in his voice that was itself a kind of recognition. Thank you, she said. 8 hours ago that would have been her only word. 8 hours of this day had changed something. At 5:56 p.m., Rachel stood in the hospital laundry facility on the basement level. Fluorescent tubes cast everything in institutional white. The air smelled like bleach and industrial soap. Massive machines tumbled endlessly, folding hospital linens into uniform geometry. She held her scrubs. Light blue cotton with the hospital logo faded from 100 washings. She had worn this uniform for 8 months. Long enough to know every corner of St. Michael's. Long enough to find what naval intelligence had sent her to find. Long enough to save a life in the process. Rachel folded the scrubs with the precision of someone who had folded a parachute, who had rolled a field pack, who understood that discipline in small things was discipline in all things. Each corner aligned. Each crease sharp enough to cut. She moved like muscle memory, hands steady, movements economical, her entire body arranged in the architecture of military bearing. The laundry attendant glanced up, then back down to his work. He had seen 1,000 nurses fold their scrubs for the last time. He wouldn't remember this one. Rachel slid them across the counter. The challenge coin felt heavy in her right cargo pocket. 2 decades of carry. 2 decades of a promise made to an 8-year-old boy in a combat zone. And now that promise had been kept, the boy had become a man, and Rachel had lost her cover in the process. She turned and walked toward the exit. The fluorescent lights hummed their insect song. The machines tumbled their endless rhythm. The hospital moved forward without her, as hospitals do, indifferent to the departure of one temp nurse from one oncology ward on one Tuesday evening in Atlanta. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was walking out into the cooling evening air at 5:53 p.m. and understanding that her mission was over, her identity was compromised, her cover was shattered, and somewhere in that wreckage, she had done exactly what she came to do. She had 3 hours before everything changed. At 6:03 p.m., 3 hours after the code, every screen in St. Michael's Marble lobby switched to breaking news. The anchor's voice cut through the ambient hospital noise like a blade. National search underway for Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres, decorated Navy SEAL medic missing from classified assignment. The crawl beneath showed her photo, her real photo, not the temp badge photo, in full dress uniform, insignia gleaming, eyes the color of storm clouds over open water. Dr. Caldwell stood frozen beside the information desk. His golf tournament had been cancelled. His board chair appointment had been cancelled. His entire constructed reality was collapsing in real time on a loop broadcast to every cable news outlet in America. A young Marine in dress blues approached the admin desk. His movements carried the precision of someone who'd trained in the halls of Quantico. He pulled credentials. His voice came out quiet, measured, the way only military personnel speak in spaces where they know they hold absolute authority. Codename, Nightingale. I'm here to debrief Master Chief Torres's emergency protocols and collect her personal effects. He looked at Dr. Caldwell. You're the surgeon who terminated her. Caldwell's mouth opened. No sound emerged. The veteran security guard, a man who'd spent 23 years in Army intelligence before taking the hospital job, stepped forward from his post by the lobby entrance. His uniform shirt suddenly seemed too small for his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice cracked like he was back in Kandahar, like he was watching something precious slip through his fingers. Master Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare. I knew her. I didn't know I knew her, but I did. That woman saved lives the same way the rain falls, quiet, constant, like it was never a choice. He extended his hand toward the Marine. She's one of ours. The elevator doors slid open. A 2-star general emerged, his uniform bearing medals like a constellation of impossible things. His presence moved through the lobby the way a storm moves through a valley. You don't question it, you simply acknowledge that the air pressure has changed. He walked to the center of the marble floor, his boots striking tile with the cadence of a heartbeat, and opened a classified personnel file that should not have existed in a civilian hospital lobby. Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Cross. He paused between each medal like a man counting ammunition. 15 field surgical procedures conducted under active fire. 4,873 lives documented as direct saves over 22 years of service. Last assignment, infiltration of internal theft ring at St. Michael's Hospital, Atlanta, to prevent diversion of Schedule II pain medications into black market channels. Cover identity, temporary nursing contractor. Protocol status, active until extraction. The general's eyes found Caldwell. Extraction was supposed to be next week. The room had gone dead silent. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they've been standing next to something they couldn't comprehend, couldn't measure, couldn't survive. Marcus Reeves rolled through the lobby entrance in his wheelchair. But he wasn't slouched. He wasn't withdrawn. For the first time in 3 years, for the first time since a sniper's bullet had taken everything from his legs, he was sitting upright. His hands gripped the wheels with the confidence of someone who'd just learned he could move again. He rolled forward until he was 10 feet from Dr. Caldwell, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decade of waiting. She took shrapnel meant for me in Helmand. Carried me 3 miles with a punctured lung. I was 8 years old. I didn't understand what I owed her. His eye stayed locked on Caldwell. I'm 28 now. I understand perfectly. The silence stretched. 10 full seconds. Long enough for Caldwell to understand that he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. That the person he'd tried to destroy was not a temp nurse. That the person he'd tried to destroy was exactly what every medal on that general's chest represented. At 6:27 p.m., 2 FBI agents entered through the main doors, credentials already in hand. They moved with the unhurried confidence of people who knew the outcome before they walked in. They approached Dr. Caldwell and the hospital administrator, who'd gone the color of old bone, and asked them to step into a conference room. What happened next took 18 minutes. The agents laid out printed pages across the conference table. Rachel's personnel file. But the pages didn't match. Whole sections were redacted. The handwriting on performance reviews didn't align. Complaint dates were impossible, complaints filed 3 days before Rachel even arrived at the hospital. Someone altered these documents, the lead agent said, her voice carrying no inflection, just fact. Forged credentials. Fabricated complaints. Falsified performance reviews. All of it designed to create a termination justification before the subject even violated any protocols. They opened another file. Digital forensics. Computer logs from Dr. Caldwell's office showing access to the hospital's personnel database at 2:16 a.m. on 3 separate dates. You tried to erase a federal agent's records to cover up your own negligence, the agent said. She let that statement hang for a moment. Then she opened a third file. Pharmacy invoices. Inventory logs. Shipping manifests. The entire supply chain that Rachel had been documenting for the past 4 weeks. Your nephew worked in the pharmacy, the agent continued. Matthew Caldwell. 24 years old. Access to the narcotic refrigerator. He's been diverting Schedule II medications for approximately 6 months. We have receipts from his sales to Sinaloa operatives totaling $847,000. She turned another page. Master Chief Torres was documenting the theft ring. She was 3 days away from presenting evidence to federal authorities. You discovered her investigation on Monday. By Wednesday morning, you'd arranged her termination. Dr. Caldwell's lawyer arrived at 6:31 p.m. It made no difference. By 6:08 p.m., Dr. Caldwell was led through that same lobby in handcuffs. The perp walk was captured by 3 different news crews. The same crowd that had stood in silence watching Rachel's identity revealed now watched his destruction with a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when people see justice move through the world like a blade, unstoppable and precise. The hospital administrator was placed on immediate leave. The board members who'd taken Caldwell's calls were being interviewed. His golf partner who chaired the oversight committee was explaining to federal investigators why he'd taken a personal interest in terminating a temporary employee without due process. Outside, Rachel Torres sat in an unmarked sedan with her handler, watching through tinted windows. The car smelled like stale coffee and the faint copper of car air freshener. Her handler sat beside her, saying nothing, understanding that some moments don't require words. Rachel's face showed nothing. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But when she reached down and rested her fingers on the dashboard, they trembled for the first time in 3 hours, not from fear, not from uncertainty, but from the terrible release of having carried something so heavy for so long and finally being allowed to set it down. 2 years later, Marcus Reeves walked down the aisle without assistance. His recovery became a case study in trauma rehabilitation. Every physical therapist in Georgia wanted to know his secret, wanted to understand how paralysis reversed itself through pure determination. But Marcus knew. The best physical therapy in the world doesn't fix a severed spinal column. What fixes it is knowing that the person who saved your life once is still out there, still capable of moving mountains. Rachel had shown him that impossible things happen when someone refuses to accept the boundaries other people set. Rachel stood in full dress uniform at the reception, her Master Chief insignia gleaming under the ballroom lights. The polished challenge coin, the same one she'd pressed into Marcus's 8-year-old hand in Helmand, the same one she'd gripped until her knuckles went white in supply closets, the same tarnished thing that had carried 2 decades of weight, sat in a display case with a brass placard beneath it. Given in Helmand Province, 2002. Returned in Atlanta, 2024. A circle completed. Marcus raised his glass. She saved me twice. Once when I was a child who didn't understand war. Once when I was a warrior who'd forgotten how to fight. The guests applauded. Rachel didn't smile. She would smile later, when no one was watching, when the day could finally be hers alone. Across town, someone recognized Dr. Caldwell at a strip mall near Interstate 285. He was sitting at a folding table with insurance brochures, his medical license revoked, his freedom contingent on supervised release, his future measured in commissions on supplemental policies that no one wanted. He looked up and saw the person looking at him, and he looked away. That was mercy, actually. That was the last mercy anyone would ever show him. At the wedding reception, a young nurse approached Rachel nervously, the way junior staff approach senior officers. Master Chief, I just started at St. Michael's. They teach your case in orientation now. About doing the right thing even when it costs everything. Rachel took her hand. Her grip was firm, steady, the grip of someone who'd held people together through their worst moments. The right thing doesn't always cost everything, Rachel said. Her voice had changed. It was deeper now, commanding, the voice of someone who'd never needed to ask permission. Sometimes it costs nothing at all. Sometimes it earns you everything that matters. As the reception ended, Marcus pulled her aside onto the balcony where the Atlanta skyline stretched out like promises. The night air carried the smell of rain on hot concrete, the scent of a city cooling after a long day. He looked at her directly, the way a man looks at someone who shaped his entire existence. You taught me something in Helm, and that took me 20 years to understand. What's that? Power is not a title, Marcus said. Power is the ability to help. Rachel smiled, a real smile, the first one in the entire story, and it changed her face completely. You were always a fast learner. They walked out together, 2 warriors who understood that some battles are won in hospitals instead of hillsides, that some medals are given to you by the people you save, and that the greatest power in the world moves quietly through the world, helping people who will never know the true cost of what they've received. If you've made it this far, you already know the kind of person Rachel Torres represents, the quiet strength that sits beside you in waiting rooms, that holds your hand through the dark. If you know someone like that, someone who helps without asking for recognition, take a moment and say thank you. And if you've ever been that person, know this, the world is watching. Your value isn't measured in what people see. It's measured in what they survive because you were there. Subscribe for more stories like this. Like this video. And comment, who's the Rachel Torres in your life?